again. I'm going to continue with our read alouds. Today I'm going to read magic words. I'm going to reread this chapter. Some of you got part of the chapter, but a couple of you did not get any of the chapter because of picture day. So I'm going to reread magic words, and then I'm also going to go on to Haunted in the Bush. If you are virtual, then you may be listening to this while other students are getting their picture. So feel free to listen and get a head start on your asynchronous work. But we're reading magic words, and then I will make a second video for Haunted in the Bush. Make sure you listen to both, and then go to our exit ticket. There's a link for it on the agenda. You're answering those 3 questions that you see right here. And then the link is right here where it says exit ticket. All right, I'm going to get started. Remember that in the previous chapter, we were introduced to a new character, Rose, and Frenchie was hoping that she wasn't his cousin because he has a little bit of a crush on her. So magic words. Rose had been with us for about 3 weeks before she fully settled in, putting up her tent beside ours, sharing food without suspicion, and even laughing this big, throaty laugh she had that filled all the space. And although she hadn't shared her coming-to story yet, I knew enough about her to know we were not blood-related. Thank God, because she made me feel like I needed to be a better person just through her existing. She was a fighter, and became more vocal about it every day. We were used to her outbursts during story. In fact, she became a part of story. The dissenting voice to the way things are, the rebel waiting for the fight to be brought, and we loved the way she rebelled anyway. Having been raised by old people, she spoke like them. It made us feel surrounded on both ends, like we had a future and a past, all bundled up in her round, dark cheeks and loose curls. It was a beautiful night in that time of year, when the bugs go to sleep, so we stayed together by the fire instead of zipping into our tents. Rose was moody and made a sudden declaration into the quiet. "We should go after the government ourselves. No more running!" She threw her hands out. The fire made the shadows of her fingers into a huddle of people against the trees. Old Minerva watched the new shadow people, slowly clapping her hands at their firelight jigging. Meg poked the fire. "We've survived this before. We will survive it again. Trust that there is always someone who has taken the greater good as mission." Beside him, Minerva was now beginning to snore. Her head slumped to his shoulder, a ball of string clutched in her hand. Rose sat back down, and we slowly placed our limbs into sleep positions under the wide, wide sky. Well, someone better come up with a plan soon, or I'll make one. She said it more to herself than to any of us. I watched her, her eyes deep and reflective, her lips moving with whispers about action and the people and all the world itself. I'd never seen anyone who looked like Rose before. She said she got her looks from having a black father, her small, wide nose, her dark, sever bones. I think it had more to do with her stubbornness, and the way it got caught up in her eyebrows and dimples when she was overthinking something. When she closed her lids over those mirror eyes, I turned to the woods and invited the dreams in, hoping they'd include the last face I memorized in profile. "You boys need to work on your hunting," said Meg. "But there's no animals around here, Meg." Meg put his hands on his skinny hips and sighed, shaking his head down as he exhaled. "Doesn't matter. They'll be back, and you need to be ready. Besides, maybe if you were better at hunting, you'd catch one of the dozen or so animals that are around here." He was addressing Slopper, who kicked rocks with the toe of his beat-up Converse. We stood in the trees in a circle around Meg, who was loading his gun while he gave us the charge for the day. We did this every second or third day, depending on the weather. Sometimes it was hunting, other times it was shelter building. Meg said it was our apocalyptic Boy Scouts. "You got to know how to tell animals are nearby. How would you do that? Anyone?" Slopper's hand shot up, exposing his round belly hanging out the bottom of his shrinking t-shirt. All of our clothes got worn to dust. It was rare to come across anything out here, and even if we did, you had to wear the new boots or holed sweater a few weeks before you forgot a dead man had worn it. I had lucked into a pair of fleece-lined army pants 2 winters past. They had been frozen to a low branch, where someone must have left them to dry. Mig tried not to sigh, but he did a little. "Yes, Slopper." "You see them?" "Okay, Slopper. If they're close enough for you to see them, there better already be a bullet or an arrow on the way to take them down. Anyone else have any ideas on how we can track them to get close enough to shoot?" Cheeboy answered, "Ground marks." "Okay. Like what?" "Poop." My face got hot when the others laughed. "That's right, Frenchie. If you see poop on the ground, you know the animal who dropped it must be close by. You can also tell by its, freshness. How long ago the animal was at that spot. Anything else?" We spent the morning talking and looking at examples of trees, gored by shedding antlers and branches snapped by lumbering bodies. Wob led us through the brush, trying to demonstrate the movements required to take prey by surprise. It was after midday when we began the walk back to the camp with a couple of rabbits and one patchy furred squirrel for lunch before an afternoon march to the next bunking. I was walking with Slopper and Cheeboy. We were singing a song we'd made up to an old-timey round dance double beat. Cheeboy had a beautiful high voice, and when he sang, he squinted his already small eyes to slits. It made him look like the friendliest giant in the forest. I loved watching him sing. Slopper hammed it up a bit, trying to mimic and trying to pretend that wasn't the case. "Wah-ya, hey-ya, wah-ya. I don't know where we're going, don't know where we've been. Way, hey-ya, all I know is I'll keep walking, can't get taken in. Wah, hey-ya." We sang it around and around in our warbling voices, somewhere between youth and where they would settle, like bees around a single flower. We were delirious with it, tossing the chorus back and forth between us like a ball making up new lyrics as we grew bored with the old ones. Mig was oddly quiet. Usually about the 6th time through, he'd snap at us to shut it, but today he just kept 2 paces ahead. He didn't even yell at the twins for lagging behind to pick up interesting-looking rocks for their growing collection. "Maybe you should collect feathers instead of rocks. It's not the smartest collection when you're on the run," he told them more than once. I jogged up to meet his pace. "Hey, Mig, what's up?" He kept cadence and didn't answer for a full minute. Birds are too quiet. Maybe they went ahead, but why? We came into the camp from the east, stepping over the wires and ducking under the hanging bells. The homesteaders had almost everything ready for the move, stacked and tied in one pile. There was just a dinner fire glowing, and the people themselves sitting on the fallen logs we dragged around the pit like they'd been waiting all day for our lazy selves to get back. I searched the faces for Rose. When I found her, I looked away and then just happened to stumble over to her log to sit. Meg handed the catch to Wob. As the only woman in the bunch, other than crazy old Minerva, the management of the cooking fell in her domain. Not that she had to cook everything herself, just that she got to say who did it and how. As the woman of the group, she was in charge of the important things. Even though she hunted that day, she decided to take care of things herself. Wob gathered her long bleached hair into a ponytail, looked us over once with her small dark eyes, and then set about skinning the animals on a flat rock with her beloved blade. She liked this solitary work, her fingers catching and releasing, pulling and knotting, in old rhythms, especially after having to mentor the hunters. I felt Rose on the log beside me. It's like the shape of her body, heat, fit right into me, and I couldn't ignore her for long. "I feel bad for you guys." "What? Why?" Rose was all aggression out of the gate. She turned to look at me, her curly hair wild around her face, half tucked into her too small parka. "Well, because we get to go learn from Mig, and you guys are stuck with that." I pointed with my lips across the fire to Minerva, who was absorbed in chewing through a bag of porcupine quills she'd harvested last week when we ran across its carcass. I hate when it's my turn for homesteaders. It's so useless. "Stuck with Minerva? You have no idea." She leaned forward, her elbows on her thighs. Our knees were almost touching. As bad as that, huh? I commiserated, glad to have something to talk about, glad that she leaned into me to do so. No, not bad at all. As a matter of fact, being with Minerva is pretty mission. She narrowed her eyes. Uh-oh. Mission? What's that? Oh, nothing. Just a little bit of language. I jumped up. Liar! She jumped up too, throwing her shoulders into mine. Not lying! True! How do you have language? My voice broke on the last syllable. My chest tightened. How could she have the language? She was the same age as me, and I deserved it more. I don't know why, but I felt certain I did. I yanked my braid out of the back of my shirt and let it fall over my shoulder. Some kind of proof, I suppose? She pushed her face into mine, and for the first time, I didn't think about kissing her. I didn't notice then, but would recall later, that she had cut bangs into her hair that day, that they fell a little lower on the left side, and she had to brush them out of her eye. Minerva has the language, and us poor guys are stuck with her, so we learn. She used her fingers to put air quotes around poor guys. Then she used those same fingers to push me in my chest. I had to turn away. I had to walk out towards the perimeter of the clearing into the darkness of branches and shadow, because I wasn't sure if I was going to cry or scream, and I didn't want her to witness it either. Hey, Frenchie, don't go far there. We need to get some rest now. We're heading out at first light. Mig called me back to the fire. I hunkered down into my sleeping spot as soon as we finished our meal. Nishin. 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 I turned the word over in my throat like a stone, a prayer I couldn't add breath to, a world I wasn't willing to release. It made my lungs feel heavy, my heart grow light, until the juxtaposition of the two phased into sleep. I couldn't yell, had no voice to make noise with. All I could do was watch and shake my head from the tree, while down below on the overgrown lawn, Mitch waved up at me, all happy and carefree. In case you missed it, this is a dream. Behind him, 6 recruiters crept forward in a semicircle, trapping my brother between them and the dense trees in which I was hiding. I pleaded with him with my eyes. I had to hold on to the trunk with everything I had. I knew that if I didn't, I'd fall, and Mitch would be angry. I tried to lift one hand, just one hand, so I could point to the recruiters, now barely 6 feet away, but as soon as I loosened a finger, I started to slide, and Mitch's face grew dark. I had to. I just had to. I couldn't let them take him again. I pulled my left hand free and started pointing like crazy. Mitch was upset, and he called to me, "No, Frenchie, hold on! For God's sake, hold on, Frenchie! You hear me? Frenchie! Frenchie!" Someone shook me awake with the toe of their boot. "Get up! We gotta go now!" I woke up sweating. Ziwang, standing over me, his brother Tree, slightly behind him. They'd hit a growth spurt this past summer. It made their almost consistent silence a little more intimidating. My sleeping bag was wedged between my legs in a sweaty twist of polyester and anxiety. Yeah, okay. I wiped the sweat from my eyes and sat up. Kids were already shouldering their packs. Meg was pouring water on the pit. "Let's go. We need to make ground today." Meg's eyes were squinty, and we moved faster than our usual pace. Minerva and little Riri were relieved of their baggage, to give them a bit of an advantage so they could keep up. A 7-year-old and a 1,000-year-old need as much of an advantage as they can get, I suppose. "It means good." It was Rose. She caught up to me, even with the added weight of Riri's roll attached to her own with a fraying bungee cord. I looked at her, a question in my eyes. "Nishin, it means good." I kept my eyes on the trail ahead. I didn't mean to, but I said it anyway. So, she said, "if you want to know what Minerva tells us, I'll share." I took 3 strides before I could answer. "Okay." "Okay?" "Yeah, okay." She punched my arm. I couldn't help but smile. I wanted to say her name, to feel it rumble past my teeth. "Yeah, Rose. That sounds Nishin." All right, that is it for our chapter, Magic Words. I'm guessing the magic word is Nishin. We're going to stop there, and you can go on to Haunted in the Bush.